Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Financial Literacy Webinars presented by Gainbridge, a digital platform of financial products and member of Group 1001, an insurance holding company. My name is Cheryl Lala Chavez, and I'm joined every month by Lauren Williams, a four-time Olympian and certified financial planner. In each one of our episodes, we'll also have a Parity athlete ambassador. This month, we welcome Mistie Bass-Boyd, retired WNBA forward and director, men's athlete and team sports marketing for Nike. Welcome, you two.
Thank you for having me.
It is lovely to be on again. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So today we are talking about family conversations about money. So from building emergency savings to planning for college and planning for financial caregiving of a loved one as well. Lauren, we'll start with you as a certified financial planner. What is something you hear all the time when you start talking with your clients about family and money conversations?
I hear la, 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 la. I don't want to hear it, Lauren. I hear my parents are not open to me having these conversations. I don't want to have these conversations with my children. I don't want to think about the things that are, personal or private or maybe a little bit negative. So like an emergency, what to do in that situation, or gosh, if someone passed away, what happens in that scenario? People love to kind of bury that stuff in the sand and just focus on the positive and live in the moment.
Definitely. Those can be hard conversations to have. So Mistie, as a wife and mom of two, when you start thinking about this from your family perspective, managing finances, budgeting, and long-term decision for your kids, how do you approach all that?
Wow. I mean, having this conversation at this moment is really intriguing, right? Because we're just coming out of a pandemic. My husband just recently retired from playing. So the shift of money definitely has been a topic of conversation. You are so used to your salary as a competitive athlete, and then to go from having that kind of salary to no salary at all and trying to figure out what that transition is in a time like this pandemic has been crazy. Not to mention, I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I had a pandemic baby on top of that. And we also made a move to Oregon from Kentucky, right? And so the cost of living is also another thing to take into consideration, and buying a new house. Like, we have done it all. And so for me, it's really been about giving myself and my family grace in this moment, and really trying to figure out what can we do with what we have, and then figure out a plan moving forward. So for me, it's been incredibly important from the moment I decided I was going to have a child was to actually budget for it before we even had one. So I actually started to create like a nesting egg of the things that I knew it was going to cost me money to have a child. And I was really proud of myself for doing that beforehand, because you really don't realize how expensive things can get with just having children. And now that we have two living and breathing young boys, for me, it's like at some point they're going to, go to college and have that choice. And if at some point they get a scholarship, okay, cool. But we're not going to bank on that happening, right? So for me, it's like setting aside money every month for them, and they have like their own little nest egg. I make it a point to at least have at least $1,000 for every year of their life for both of them. And so that's put into an account that's on their own. We don't touch it. It's not a part of an emergency fund. Like, that is their fund for their future. So at minimum, when they graduate, at a minimum, they'll have $18,000 a piece, right? And that is huge for anybody, but that's the minimum, right? So anytime there's like an over excess of income or something, like, we put a little extra, and then anything that comes from, their godparents or their grandparents or anything like that, it just like goes into the account and it's out of our brains. I think what I need to do as I continue to learn about financial is try to figure out like how to make that money make money. And that's like the second stage of like just my learning. And then Emergency funds, huge, have always been an emergency fund person, because when you own a house or you have cars, like there's certain finances that you just like, oops, got to take care of that. Oops. Instead of like really, because money comes with like a lot of anxiety of like, what if we don't have, right? And so just putting aside extra money that you don't need to spend is into an emergency account is really, really important. And the last thing that I'll say is childcare. What in the world? On the like coming from Kentucky,
Yeah.
coming to the West Coast, I'm like, who can afford $3,000 a month in childcare? Like, it is insane. And I think about like, this is the kind of money that you spend for college, not for someone to watch your child so you can go to work. And so that has been one of those things that like, we have kids and that's a bill that we're going to have to pay. But it's just like, oh, like it's so hard to really like when you have a desire to like become financially literate and to make the right decisions for you and your family, and there's certain bills that like, oh my gosh, like does this make sense? Well, yeah, it's got to make sense, but we spend a lot of time on like trying to make sure our resources go to the right things while also building a future for our retirement, for our children's future education, and then also just at the end of the day enjoying the life that we live, right?
Yeah.
Being able to take vacations and make memories, right, and not collect things. So that's pretty much how our household looks at things. I think we have a solid foundation with the ability to continue to learn and grow and capitalize on what we're doing in our new corporate careers.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I mean, that was such an in-depth answer to that, and I appreciate it. And I also agree, because I have two small children as well, that the childcare costs are outrageous. I'm also on the West Coast here, and it's a cost that I never thought about prior to having kids, right? Like that was something I didn't think about or budget for. And I wish I would have, honestly. So, but that's the whole point of these modules, is to have conversations around money. Gainbridge has a financial education center on their website. And the modules that we're going to be talking about today is under the investing in your future. You'll be able to find some short educational modules that focus on building the emergency savings, as Misty was talking about, paying for college, information on 529 plans, a bunch of different educational modules there. Lauren, let's go back to the emergency savings. So let's clarify, what is emergency savings and how does a family, including all these costs that Misty just mentioned, start to build it?
Yeah, this is a really good question too, because it is one of those kind of open-ended things. You hear on the internet, or if you do a quick Google search, you'll find a lot of things that say 3 to 6 months of your expenses is your emergency savings, and they don't provide a lot of depth or coverage on like what exactly is emergency above and beyond having this pool of money saved. So the first thing I'll say is that I generally think of emergency savings as at least 3 times your take-home pay, which is a little bit different than 3 times your expenses. Because ideally, whatever you're bringing home, you're saving some of it, and some of it is going towards your main regular expenses. And the reason I like to do at least 3 times your take-home pay is because when you think about this, if it's some sort of emergency, like you said, we all just came through COVID. So if you have 3 times your take-home pay, you're able to make a little bit better decisions when an emergency comes along. And so when I think about this, it's like, okay, I'm out of work and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next, or, I'm looking for my next job because I got laid off or whatever the case may be. Well, if we have 3 times your take-home pay, you don't have to take your kids out of soccer. You don't have to stop going to the gym. You don't have to stop seeing your therapist, which all of those things would be considered discretionary, and they probably weren't accounted for when you were going through what are my monthly expenses, what are my monthly bills. You're probably thinking, keep a roof over my head, keep us fed, keep the utilities, and your emergency fund would be a lot smaller if you just accounted for those things. But in a time that things are going rough, you want to create stability for your children. And when we think about this module is all about caring for a loved one, what's the best thing you can do for your kids in that moment? And it's maybe not letting them know that someone is out of work, or we can't afford soccer camp or whatever it is right now. Creating that stability. If you have a much better emergency fund, you can weather that emergency a lot better. The other thing I like to think of too is that, because this is all about athletes, a 3-month emergency fund is kind of the bare minimum for everyone, but you also want to consider how much risk you're taking on. So if you're an entrepreneur, we take on a lot more risk because our income is doing like this. And athlete income does just like this as well, right? So you want to have a more robust savings account or emergency savings. And when I think about this, what happens if at the very beginning of the season you get injured and now all of your income is done for the year? Not only are you injured and not able to earn in the way that you usually would be able to, but on top of that, you're probably going to spend a little bit of extra money working with a physical therapist or, some sort of person to help get you healthy so you can get back on your field of play. You want to have an emergency fund that's going to cover those sorts of things. So 3 months is probably not going to be enough to kind of cover the risk that you take by having that fluctuating income. So those are the kind of main things that stick out to me. And then what is an emergency? Beyonce tickets to a concert, not an emergency. Your best friend's birthday, so-and-so's having a baby and you got to be at their baby shower. None of those things are emergencies. You do not want to be dipping into your emergency fund for things like that. You want to save up, or you want to just say like, hey, I can't make it because that was too short a notice sort of thing. An emergency is 4 flat tires. It's trying to get across country to your family because someone's having a health crisis. It's meeting the deductible on your health insurance because you're having some sort of health situation, being out of a job. Big things that you really couldn't see coming are those things that are emergencies. Even home maintenance, sometimes people try to throw that in emergency fund bucket. If you're a homeowner, there's going to be home maintenance. You don't know when the air conditioner is going to break or when something's going to happen, but you should be setting aside money because you know that the home is going to need to be maintained. And so ideally that wouldn't be coming from your emergency fund either, nor would car maintenance, oil changes, car breaking down, having to spend $1,100. I just had to do it on my car. Not necessarily an emergency. I didn't know exactly when I was going to have to spend that money, but at the same time, I know that my car needs to be maintained. It's older and that stuff is going to come up.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, definitely. And so Mistie, you had talked about already that you've thought about it with your partner, thinking about college for your kids, thinking about having like these savings accounts for them. Is that savings account separate than what you're doing for college savings?
Yeah. So each of my boys have an account that's linked to ours, which allows us to put that money inside of their accounts. I think at a certain point, so my son's just turning 5, like I said, so we've got a little bit over 5,000 in his account and 2,000 in Cashel's account. So I think it's just about having the right amount to start to do something like a 529, that it can start working for them. I think we're at a point where it's probably like now is the time, instead of, it's just like 1,000 here, 1,000 there, but like actually substantial amount of money to be able to kind of invest for their future.
Gotcha. And so Lauren, what is a 529 plan? And is that the best plan, or are there different plans that we can use for college savings?
Yeah, I mean, there are different options. The 529 is the most popular of the education plans. And so the thing that's cool about the 529 is that like you're putting money away and it's what we call tax deferred. So you put in $6,000 and over the course of the 18 years, it turns into $60,000. When you go to take that money out, you're not paying anything on those gains. So generally in a regular investment account, you would pay for that. Like, hey, this account grew, time to pay up to Uncle Sam because, this account grew. Well, if you're taking that money out for educational expenses, there's no tax related to you taking that money out. So that's a really cool feature of being able to put money into a 529 plan, in addition to it being invested. And like you said, working on your behalf. So that 6 can turn into 60 when you have the money invested. If you have it sitting in a savings account, it's probably going to turn into 6,600 over the course of the year because the interest rates are so small right now. The other thing about 529 plans is that they go state by state. And so you're going to want to consider whether you want to use your state 529 plan or if you want to use a different state. A lot of people don't realize that you can use a different state. And the things you're going to be considering there is like, well, what does my state have as investment opportunities inside of that 529 plan? Also, what are the fees related to investing in my 529 plan? Because people think of it as something that's free. There are actual fees related to the investments. And so you want to be mindful of that as well. And then the third thing is tax deduction. So sometimes if you have state taxes, your state is also going to offer state tax deductions for putting money into that 529 plan. So you put $5,000 in, that's $5,000 of income that you didn't earn on your state tax return, which is going to make your state taxes a little bit lower. I live in a state where there is no state taxes. So Texas, and so there's no state taxes. Is there really a benefit to using my state's 529 plan, or should I look at another? That's one thing that I can X off the list and I can go kind of shop around and see. I actually don't recommend usually the Texas 529 plan for people in Texas because there are a lot of other good options out there. But if you live in, let's say, Maryland, you do get a state tax deduction. And it's hard to beat that deduction plus whatever investment earnings, even if it's a little bit more expensive in that account. So there's a lot of different things to weigh as you think about a 529 plan, but it's a really cool way to be able to save for your kids' future. And like I said, the sooner the better, because the more you get the money in, the more opportunity it has to work on your behalf. If you start saving at around age 12 or 15, you only got 2 or 3 years. It's hard to, get enough money in the account to make it worthwhile, but it's also hard to give it any real opportunity to grow.
Gotcha. And are there any caps on the 529 plans, like the IRA, where there's like a cap yearly? Is there a cap for the 529?
Yeah, so go state by state as well. And they're usually pretty large, like $400,000 as a cap. Okay. So yeah, you're not going to see anything like a $5,000 or $6,000 or any income limits related to being able to participate into the 529 plans, but it does vary state by state.
Gotcha. So Mistie, as you're hearing all of this, what are you considering in terms of financial caregiving as a parent? Are there other things that you're thinking about too?
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for the information on being able to do 529s in different states. That is a learning tool I had no idea about. So I definitely will be looking into that. And Cheryl, are you talking about like just in terms of like my parents?
Well, we're going to get there. But still you as a parent. So basically, are there other things that you wish people knew about, expenses related to having children?
Yeah. I think like if you plan on having children, no matter which way you plan on having them, because there's just so many different ways now with surrogacy and like really, if you have any intention, like start saving now, like beforehand, because there are little things that happen like insurance, like as an athlete, most of us don't have insurance. We have it through our teams, and our insurance is predicated on whether or not we're signed. And then if we get cut, like we get COBRA, but the amount that we have to pay to keep our insurance is insane. And so for me, it's like knowing that your kid is going to go to the hospital, know they're going to have to go to the doctor when they're sick, all the different, if you don't have insurance, like I think just going for like a healthcare checkup for a child on its own is anywhere from $300 to $500. So to have to, one, make sure you are prepared to have to buy your own insurance as an individual, like having to budget that, think about that, because it's not until you like get another job or you get insurance through something else where, those deductibles come in and it's like more of a relief. Kids do the craziest things. They stick things up their nose and like, they think they're Peter Pan and can jump off of, the stairs, and it's just, they're crazy. Kids are just wild. I love them, but they're crazy. And so like really just making sure that you're prepared. If you are working for a corporation that offers you insurance, making sure you pick the right benefits that fit for your family. I didn't recognize that until I started working for Nike, that we had like 3 different options, and was like, yeah, as a family, I'm going to need all those benefits because I just don't know. Like I rather pay the premium to have the best insurance so it doesn't back end me later. When you have a baby, you're talking $30,000, $40,000 just for the day of the baby's entrance into this world, and you just don't know what can happen. And so for me, it's just like, if I didn't have insurance, there's no way I could have paid $60,000 to have an emergency C-section or to have the medication that I needed. It's very expensive. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that the day your child comes into this world, it's not the end. It's just the beginning of everything, right? So I think about medical, right? Medical, dental, vision, I'm thinking about extracurricular activities, right? Us as athletes, like, of course, when we have kids, we want them to be athletes too. That stuff costs money. My husband just came in today talking about getting Braven into Damian Lillard's basketball camp, and it's $385. And I'm like, are we serious for a 5-year-old? Like, are we really trying to do this? But it's expensive. So really just like, with him in that, and he's in karate, and that's like a monthly bill, but we know that it's adding to his character. He's learning discipline. So extracurriculars are really important for the development of your children, and they need that. So all of that, like just being very aware of what is coming in and what you should be spending your money on for the health and benefit of your family. It's really important. And then I'll probably say the last thing is like, and I'll always go back to like just me as an athlete. Like, I love fashion. I love to shop. And it's definitely like the way that I think of shopping has become very different. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I think I'm like 2 promotions away from that. So like being okay with not having what you always had as an athlete, and like kind of stepping back for your financial wellness in your future and setting that up is huge too. Like, I think a lot of us athletes, we think that that paycheck is never going to end, and it does. And life continues. So the more that you can prepare for what your first retirement looks like, not a whole lot of people can say that they've retired by 30, right? Or 20. Like, you'll actually have 2 retirements. So like prepare for what retirement looks like in your 20s and 30s, and prepare in your next phase of life of what that retirement looks like in your, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever that is. But start preparing for it now, and all of, the life monuments that you go through and that you're choosing to, because not everybody's going to have kids. Not everybody wants them, right? And so life is going to be different. But I think still thinking about what investments look like and what you want your future to look like, start preparing now.
You gave so many good points. Oh my goodness, Misty, that was great. And I always talk about the 2 retirements, and people are just like mind blown, like, what? What do you mean retire? And I'm like, yes, we absolutely retire, because most of us, especially females in sports, are not going to be able to kick our feet up and never work again. And then it's going to happen all over again. And then I love when you were just talking about the idea of like, be okay, knowing that you're not going to have all the same comforts that you had before. You talked about like being an athlete, but even like becoming a parent, you have to shift some of those dollars. So if it was a vacation that you were going on, internationally every year with your friends, or some sort of turn up event that was super duper expensive, you could pick up and go. But those dollars need to be redirected, because you have this new expense that is not going anywhere for at least 18 years, and generally probably 30, 40, 50. I know my mom just sent me a dress in the mail. It's like she's still paying to buy me things later on.
Ooh, so $3,000 a month. I'd tell you, I'm like, dang, that could have been a turn up for sure. Nope, it's going to the kids' school.
Right. And it's even too, true sometimes too, you weren't spending $3,000 a month discretionarily. So like these expenses are popping up more now than ever. You need to be thinking ahead. And I met a lady recently who had saved up for her child for their whole college education before they were born. And so they were talking about, the child being born and how proud they were to have thought that far in advance. 99.9% of America is not thinking like that. But what a cool thing for you to be thinking about, like, okay, here's what I want for my life, and here's why I can't ball till I fall up here, but I need to start, here's what I earn, and I need to be putting some of it aside for all of the different things. And competing priorities is something that we all are dealing with all the time. And then the third point that I thought you said that was really cool was about health insurance. Well, I was like, cool with an asterisk by it. It's one of those things that we are talking about here, but often we don't think about as athletes. And I know it was the biggest slap in the face for for me when I retired from sport. And like I said, they offered me the insurance. They said, here you go, but it's also 102%. So that's what Cobra is, 102% of the premium that they were paying. And so we have so little awareness of the benefits that we're receiving sometimes. And we just kind of take for granted that, this is free. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work for it, but we don't know the real cost of these things. And I was just like, you got to pay what for health insurance? But I'm not sick. And then you're like, well, I don't want to pay this because I'm healthy. But as soon as something happens and you feel like you learn what the bill is, if you have to pay out of pocket, you're like, oh, wait a minute. So getting some awareness around what health insurance is, what it costs, and what is most appropriate for you, because there are different plans. There's the platinum premium, you don't have to pay almost anything plan, which is going to charge you more on a monthly basis. But then there's also the super duper cheap plan where maybe you can use your HSA, you can load up, an account, you can start to invest the money in the HSA. There's lots of different options. So you don't want to just pick what your friend picked. You want to pick what's appropriate for you. And especially too, like I said, you might be on that HSA plan, but every year in October, you get what we call open enrollment, where you can change. So if you're planning for a family, you might switch from that plan that is the HSA plan where you are loading up dollars to the super duper premium plan, because you want to have as little out-of-pocket expenses when you're going to be going to the doctor quite a bit. So we definitely need to think more about that. And I was completely caught off guard when I retired from sport.
Yeah, so many great points there. Thank you both for sharing that. And so as we're talking about kids and caring about kids, now we're going to flip the conversation and caring for elders, right? So in Gainbridge's Financial Education Center, there's several articles there that are about financial caregiving for elders. Lauren, what are some typical responsibilities of being a financial caregiver for an elder now?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that come up. So, looking at what benefits are available to them. So it's Medicare versus Medicaid. What is going to be most appropriate? Am I going to bring that person into my household? What expense is going to be related to bringing them into my household? Not just the cost monetarily, but also the cost in the form of time and actually doing that caretaking. And if you end up with an honorary parent or grandparent that you're caring for, it can be quite a bit of stress on you and impact your ability to work, which impacts your ability to earn a living. So there's a lot of things to think of as it pertains to having to care for someone financially. And getting their bills in place. They may not, someone is suffering from memory loss. They may not know passwords. They may not know how to access various things. And maybe they can't even give you power of attorney to be able to do those things on their behalf. So initially, you're just kind of like wading through, seeing what you can see, waiting for a past due bill to come in the mail to know that they even had that bill. Then you got to call in. It can get quite complicated. And that's why I think it's really important to have conversations with the people we care about before they're ill, before anything is going on, to decide how they want to be cared for and if they have any plans in place to be cared for appropriately, so that it doesn't end up being a big monetary expense to you. Because I don't know very many people that are just going to leave their mom on the curb if they didn't plan accordingly, but it could also completely wreck your financial plan, wreck the plans for your children. You got to stop saving for those 529 plans. You stop saving for your own retirement because you now have this new expense that you weren't expecting.
Yeah. And so Mistie, as you kind of think about this aspect of it now, right? Is this something that you and your husband are thinking about for yourselves, like planning for yourselves as well as your children?
Yeah. I think when Lauren talked about in the beginning, when she's like, la, 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 yeah, I think we're probably there right now. It's hard to have those tough conversations. I think they're like on the back burner where they're there. And at some point, like I have 3 siblings. He has 2. And I think that's usually like the conversation, right? It's like, well, who's going to do it? Like, which one of us is going to take over? And given that we're probably the most responsible out of all of ours, it's like it kind of defaults to us. So, I think we've had little conversations about whether or not like our mothers would be living with us at some point. But we haven't really dug deep into what like the financial planning of that looks like. I definitely think it's worth like deeper conversations, but When you have two kids and then you think about additional parents, like that weight or that pressure gets a little bit heavier, because at the same time, like that's a lot like an emergency, right? Like that could happen at any point. I have an 82-year-old father, right? I'm pretty sure like I have plenty of siblings on that side where like that's not going to be an issue, but it's just like these things are like real and definitely worth a plan, right? If somebody can plan their child's full college scholarship and have that in the bank, then we can surely have conversations about what that looks like, whether it be 10 to 20 years from now too.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so Lauren, we'll switch it to you now. How does someone plan for this, right? How does somebody plan to become a financial caregiver?
Yeah, I would say that the main thing is starting by having conversations. So like you said, you are a caregiver if you are a parent of children. And so as you think about that, what is the financial impact of you not being around? Of your kids needing care and you're not being present for that, for some catastrophe happens. Who do you want to look after your children, and how are they going to look after your children? Because your salary goes away if you're not here. And so this is where you start getting into conversations about life insurance and things like that, but also having conversations with the people that you would want to look after your children. So, Mistie just mentioned having multiple siblings. They may all love and care for her, but, which one do you want looking after your children? Or maybe not at all. Maybe you want your best friend, or maybe you want your spouse's siblings or your parents. There's lots of people in your life. Everybody may kind of get into a quarrel and say, like, I can take care of them best. Or somebody may be saying, you take them because you have the most money. That's another thing that people come up against. So, Missy mentioned being the most responsible. I don't know if that necessarily means she has the most money of all the people, but sometimes they take that perception and they say, hey, because we expect this of you, or we think this of you, this is all your responsibility. You have to take mom, you have to take dad, or whatever the case may be. So you really want to be thinking about, while things are good, how can I get something in place to make sure that my children are in the hands of who I want them to be in? As I think about myself, that my wishes are taken care of. Do I want to be kept alive forever and ever? Do I want, them to pull the plug after 7 days? Who do I want, taking care of my finances if I'm alive, but I can't take care of them? And then you go up that next generation. So it's like, the generation after yourself as a present person, and then those people that may be older than you or outside of that realm of your immediate family. And that's your parents and your siblings. And so when it comes to parents, like I said, they don't want to talk about it. They know that they're closer to death than they are to being a baby in life. But you can't let them ignore it, because what does it look like when they pass and nothing is in order? So now you're grieving the loss of a loved one, but also having to figure out, did they have any life insurance? Where was it? How do I get access to their accounts? You're having to go through this whole state process called probate to figure out how to get access to all the various things. And it's just like a complete mess, and it adds to your grief. It adds to your stress. It impacts you financially. You're going to be off of work for days. So that's one thing. But then you may also be paying for things out of pocket, either because they don't have funds or because their funds are tied up. And so as we think about financial caregiving, you can end up in a situation where you're doing tons and tons of caregiving unexpectedly, because these conversations weren't had. And then, like I said, if they end up in a situation where they're incapacitated or not able to care for themselves and they didn't save enough, then you end up in a position of a financial caregiver as well.
Yeah. I mean, these are definitely hard conversations to have. I don't even know how to bring them up sometimes with like family members or anything like that. Is there advice that you would give for like, how do we bring up these conversations, with our siblings, with our parents, with, elders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing I would say is to ask a lot of questions. Sometimes people are just like, ugh! The answer to the question may be just like, no, I don't want to talk about it. Get out of my business, all those sorts of things. But by simply having asked it, you brought it back to the forefront of their brain. And if you ask them in an in-person situation and they kind of avoid the conversation, you still can go back and write it down. So you can send a text message, an email, a written letter if they're older and more prone to that. But to ask the really pertinent questions of like, and think about how it would make them feel. So like, how would you feel if I was left with all of these things to carry and you knew you could have done something about it? Those are the kind of questions that flip it to say like, what would be your responsibility here? Like, I'm asking you a hard question you don't want to deal with, but if I make it as you as the caregiver, which most people don't, they love to like care for the people they love. It's like, oh, like I don't want to leave Mistie hanging. Like, let me get my stuff together or something. The other thing that I would say too is to be transparent yourself. So, the way I approached it with my mom was, do you have these documents in place? And she kind of like started to pivot a little, and I'm like, hey, I just got my documents done, and this is what the process was like. It's not as hard as you think it can be. We can do it together. As a financial planner, I had to be kind of the example for my clients, but, actually opening up and saying like, I don't know this, or, I'm also struggling with this. I have my children and I'm trying to get some guardianship in place. How did you get guardianship in place? So that holds your siblings accountable. If they've got kids, hey, you also need to get these documents because I'm not trying to inherit your kids. I want somebody else to, And so by opening up and being more transparent about either your fears or how you're doing it, how you're taking action, it allows them, like, they're not feeling attacked when you ask them questions. They're feeling like, oh, this is a conversation, and I can also help them because you're asking them questions about like, how can I do better in my situation based on what I'm sharing with you?
I love that. Thank you so much for that tip. And Mistie, there is such an overwhelm with parenting and parenthood and finances. How do you deal with that overwhelm?
Ooh, day by day. Right. And I say day by day because there's just a lot of transition in my life, just in general right now, and my husband's, right? I think I alluded to a lot of it in the beginning, transitioning from being a professional athlete into a corporate environment where, salary has changed. The type of work has changed. The benefits have changed. So I think just being really aware of just all of the moving pieces right now, and like really settling into my second life has, it's just giving myself grace and figuring out, okay, like, let's see, if I've been retired since pretty much 2019, like I'm still in infancy and kind of learning what it looks like now. And so for me, it's just having really open dialogues with my husband, but also with myself in my spending. When you have habits, it's really hard to break habits and the way that you used to do things versus how you need to be doing things for your future. And that's just me being very transparent. And I think also it's just like, as I go through corporate America and climb the ladder, like knowing that with each promotion, there's a release of some of that pressure of like, okay, now I can do X, Y, and Z with like 20% of my money, and I need to be doing this with the other 30%. How can I invest? And, how can I be smarter with my money than I was when I was in my 20s and was frivolous with a lot of my cash, right? And so I think for me, it's about honesty and transparency for myself, and then also be willing to learn and use tools that are given to me. Nike offers free financial education and for us to get pretty much lessons and tutoring on how to like control. So like utilizing the resources that are being given as well. Mm-hmm. And then also like just, the way that every minute was accounted for as an athlete, try to figure out how you can get every dollar accounted for, because sometimes like when you spend money, it just goes. And, we're not, back, and I'll say the 1990s, because I remember people filling out their checkbooks and like, having to balance their checkbooks. Like we don't do that anymore. Like we have cards and it's spent and you can go online, but like you don't recognize until you really take account for like, what did you spend this month? And why did you spend it? And how did you spend it? So it's just becoming hyper sensitive to how you spend your money, and then how can you save and prepare for the future while still enjoying the present. Because I do believe at the end of the day, like when you go, you can't take it with you either. So like you still have to enjoy life as you go through it. So finding that balance between protecting your future and enjoying your present is like a really fine balance that I'm still learning, but excited to like continue to move forward and figure this whole thing out.
So real, so real. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Misty, for such an engaging conversation on family finances today. I appreciate both of you joining me this evening. I want to also give a big thank you to our sponsor, Gainbridge, a digital platform providing direct access to trusted financial products and free financial literacy education like this one, giving your future a boost. Click on the link to find the articles we talked about today on family resources, as well as more resources on financial education and literacy. We'll see you next time. Thank you.